Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. A Thoughts to Inspire interview. At the Work Wellness Institute, the future of work starts with well-being. Dive into our Workplace Wellness Work Bites for summaries of our carefully curated trending webinars, published workplace research findings, and informative interviews with key industry subject matter experts. Learn and stay informed about work wellness anywhere, anytime with Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. Welcome to our Thoughts to Inspire series, bringing together subject matter experts from across sectors to present evidence-informed, thought-provoking ideas and approaches. These interviews invite conversation and bring attention to the most pivotal and timely workplace wellness topics.
Welcome to our Thoughts to Inspire series, where we interview experts in their field, and they bring unique perspectives and ideas to workplace topics. I'm Dr. Cameron Stockdale. I'm the president and CEO of the Work Wellness Institute, and we're really pleased to bring you today Dr. Arla Day. I'm going to read some of your credentials here. It's a long list, so I'll read it, and then I'll get you to add to it because I know that there's more. Dr. Arla Day is a full professor of an industrial organizational psychology at St. Mary's University in Halifax. You're the director of the CN Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. You were the chair of the Nova Scotia Psychological Healthy Workplace Program Committee. You've authored many articles. You've written book chapters pertaining to healthy workplaces, occupational stress, employee well-being, and work-life balance. Now that's impressive, but I know you have a lot more that you can add to this. So I'm going to get you to add a little bit to it.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now. I think with some of the other stuff, like I think I've done. I'm the project lead for the wage-funded EyeLead Project, which is on inclusive leadership, equity, and diversity, and also the project director for the Funded Empower Partnership, which looked at providing evidence-based solutions to foster healthy workplaces. And I'm also a fellow of the CPA and Canada Research Chair for over 10 years, and a fellow, Erskine Fellow at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand.
See, I knew there was a lot more there.
There was
We're going to talk about your EyeLead project a little bit more in the interview, because I think it's a really interesting project that you're working on. So Dr. Day has been a longtime friend of the organization, as I alluded to, and you've been involved in our webinars and our research, and now our podcasts. I know that when I started here in the organization, the former CEO spoke of, there's this person at St. Mary's and she's fantastic. So, maybe talk a little bit about how you started to get involved with the organization and frankly, why you've carried on in the work that you're doing with us.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. Maybe part of it is because your predecessor was very convincing that I needed to get involved, and this was you're heading towards all of these amazing goals, and I bought into that. I think there was also a certain alignment between what the Institute was doing at that time and continues to do today, and the work that I'd been doing for, hate to date myself, but probably over 30 years. And some would say even longer, because I was doing a lot of this stuff informally in high school and undergraduate, is really looking at worker well-being. I've always been interested in burnout and job stress. And so a lot of the work that I've always done is looking at identifying what creates, bad environments, what creates burnout and stress, and identified what leaders and organizations can do to help reduce stress, burnout, and support workers. So I guess the lead into, it was a few years before I started working with the Institute, a couple of sort of paramount or key things happened. I was a guest editor for a special journal on healthy workplaces with Kevin Kellaway. And we created, I guess, the first model of psychologically healthy workplaces. And again, really drawing on our research and the research of others in terms of what we knew about it. And another key point aspect that happened around the same time is I got involved with the American Psychological Association, and they were starting some initiatives in looking at psychologically healthy workplaces across North America, and how do we encourage, how do we support, and how do we recognize their accomplishments. So between those two things, that kind of was the momentum to get me going. And then, as I said, I met up with Mark White, and we talked a lot about what we can do for workers, and helping workers with disabilities, as well as creating healthier workplaces overall for everybody. And the rest, they say, is history.
So we invited you here to talk about psychologically healthy workplaces and a psychologically safe workplace. And we use that terminology. People may have heard it, but what does that mean to you? Can we sort of define that for our listeners, and so they understand what we're talking about when they hear it?
Yeah, absolutely. So those are two, I would consider those two separate and quite unique, maybe constructs in there. But like focusing on the psychologically healthy workplace aspect, I think the important thing to remember there is it isn't an end state. A lot of people kind of have, this vision of, an organization that has maybe ping pong tables in their workplaces, and apples and fresh fruit in their break room. But it's more of it's a value or a state of mind, a workplace culture that really supports workers and treats them with respect. And this is respect while helping them guide to achieve their joint work tasks and goals. So there really is an emphasis on both well-being and effectiveness of the individual and the overall organization. So we can and some of the definitions even extend that to clients, customers, community, and environment. So we're operating to support all of these stakeholders in a positive, effective manner. The psychological safety aspect of it is a different somewhat construct, and it's been defined many ways. So there's a little bit of controversy over that. We typically look at that, if you're looking at the very basic way in terms of a healthy workplace, is feeling safe. Be sort of safe to express themselves, safe to be involved in the organization, and having opportunities to grow and develop their own strengths. And that, again, that is a key aspect of healthy workplaces. The one thing, or I guess the second thing I'd like to say about healthy workplaces is that you'll see a whole bunch of models. Like Canada has a standard for psychologically healthy workplaces. You've got, I think it's 13. Our original model, I think we had 7 aspects. I've looked at models with 5 or 6, and that those components aren't the important things. As I said, it really comes down to how you think about your employees and value them, and the amount of respect, sort of a mutual respect that's in the organization. And all of those other things will come out in the wash. So if you respect your employees, you are going to want them to be involved in decision making. If you respect your employees, you will want them to have good work-life balance. If you respect them, you want to make sure that they have opportunities to grow and develop. So when we're talking about it, we really talk about it at a very sort of base level to help organizations think about what they're doing and moving forward.
I like what you said earlier when you commented on the fact that a ping pong table or a foosball table does not make a healthy workplace, but that may be the result at the end of it down the road. So start respecting your employees, and that may result in some of those cultural things that you put in the workplace that have impact at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And we look at a model. So I've derived a model that is based on Shine's work on organizational culture, and he aligns culture with as an iceberg analogy. And so at the very bottom of that iceberg, that's way below the surface, are your basic assumptions about people, humanity, life. Just underneath the surface are your values, what's important to you, and what the organization believes in. And then above the surface are the artifacts. And those are all the visual things. So those are your foosball tables, and those are your office policies. It's the decor of your office. It's all of those rules and regulations. So what we always say is we can't. These artifacts aren't, as you said, aren't necessarily representative of the underlying values, right? So having the oranges in the cafeteria does not mean you're a healthy workplace. But if you value your employees, you have the basic assumption that they're good and that should be our number one concern, then you are going to probably offer the fresh fruit. And if it's that environment, you might have that ping pong table or the Wii and all of those things. So you have to make sure that those are derived from the actual values, rather than assuming they're indicative of a healthy workplace on their own. Because what we find is then people say, oh, well, it's easy. I'll just put out a basket of fresh fruit and I'm good to go. I don't have to do anything else. But then they miss out the very basic things, in the next round of, if they had a bad quarter, they start firing people without looking at, wait a second, maybe we should be looking at how do we keep them on or support them through this rough time, and give a little, and our shareholders maybe aren't going to get as much of a return on it, but we're still being viable, but we're trying to keep our family together.
Yeah. Did an interview with an academic down in the States not that long ago. And one of the things that this individual spoke about is asking your employees why all the time. Like, why have you reacted like that? Why? And that really, leads you to that sort of underlying cultural issue. That it was really interesting to me that there was a whole different approach. And it's not about putting the oranges on the table. It's, why are you putting the baskets on the table, or why didn't you take the, and I think that was a good approach that I learned from that interview a little bit. I guess my question to you is, you've been working in this field for a long time. What's motivated you to work on this topic? What's been the impetus? What drove you to be a researcher in this field?
I think, as I said, from that, I've always been interested in mental health and well-being and health in general of people. And I think I've always had, I'm sure most psychologists say this, that at some point, we wanted to be maybe, a clinical psychologist or a counselor, and we wanted to help people. And I think that's sort of where I was going in there. And what could I do to help individuals? And then I did a big shift away from sort of individual clinical psychology for several reasons. Is that really wasn't my passion that way. But I also realized just the impact that work has on individuals. So, we spend up to a third of our life, our adult working life, at work. And we have these broad range of individuals that are not necessarily going to go to counseling, or they may not think they need counseling, or they don't have those types of supports, but they are dealing with a lot of stuff. And these are, normal, everyday, computer crashes, or your car crashes, or relationships crash, or there's health issues, and they're struggling. But there's no support for them that way. It's almost like you're saying, deal with it, right? Come on, get on. So that idea of how do we leverage all those positive things of the workplace in order to support individuals. And again, I'm always harping back to the productivity, because I'm a big believer that that increases meaning in our life. The more effective we are at things, and work can be a very valuable aspect, the more that we feel good about ourselves. If we're able to achieve goals at work, that gives us meaning in our life and helps us be happy, I guess, and successful. So with that, it's we've always looked at all the bad things at work, right?
Yeah.
And I keep saying work isn't a 4-letter word, and then I get corrected. Yeah, well, okay, it's technically a 4-letter word, but it's really not an evil thing that we view it. There's evil things that happen at work. So we have our toxic relationships or toxic bosses. We have our overwork. We have our, the stresses and demands that happen. But in and of itself, there's a lot of positive to it. And you can go to jobs, that are not very pleasant. We talk about dirty jobs, that there are in the world that people would say maybe aren't what they would consider their ideal dream job. But we go there, we find some really happy people. And why is it? It's because the conditions of their work, they may be dealing with like sewers and black water and all of that, which is a dirty, dirty job, but they have a great supervisor or they have a great team and the supportive environment, and they're good at their job and they're supported in it and they're told they're good at the job and their thing. And all of those things can create like high levels of job satisfaction and meaning. So how do we leverage all those positive things in jobs and in order to support individuals?
So you talk about the performance end of it in your work at times, right? Like the healthy cultures, healthy workplaces. There's a performance outcome at the end of the day. So a lot of your work is certainly focused on the sort of the assessment and improvement and well-being that has a positive outcome. So for those leaders, managers who are listening to this podcast, what are some of the cornerstones of healthy workplaces that they should be looking for?
Okay, good. Yeah, another great question. So I think I've touched on some of them, and I'll kind of sort of throw them in together. So and these are aspects that again can lead to this healthy workplace, with the understanding that the core aspect of is you have to value. So if you can do all of these things or you can have all this, but if in the end of the day, if the organization doesn't really care about the employees, they don't value them as individuals, and don't respect them, all of this is nothing. But these are ways that again maybe are indicative of things that we can do. So we talk about work and non-work balance and integration, and understanding that work is one aspect of a person's life, and how do we help them deal with all of those things. It is that alignment of values of the individual and the workplace, and making sure that their individuals are supported and that the individuals support the organization's goals and values. Obviously, health and safety. You want those people to come to work healthy. You want them to be healthy at work, and you want them to leave healthy. And that's not only in terms of physical health. You don't want accidents. You don't want injuries on the job, but also in terms of psychological health, right? So you want them to be able to come, have a productive day, and go home, maybe feeling, that tired from doing a good day's work, but not sort of emotionally drained or exhausted. I think I talked a little bit about the development as well. So growth and development. I think if we're looking at individuals, and again, this gets back to the meaning that people are seeking, that developing their skills, looking at their career development. Some individuals are very happy to stay, they want an entry level, they want to stay at entry level, they like that, and they don't want to go more than that. I think that's perfectly acceptable and should be supported. Others want to try different things. They may want to go vertically, try new skills that way. They may want to move horizontally in different areas of the organization. Again, anything the organization can do to support those, I think that's great. With the realization that in doing so, you may also lose people, right? So you may have those individuals who are growing, but they're going to outgrow your organization and go somewhere else. Now that hurts me, my organization personally, but at that point, I have to put the well-being of that individual above myself and the organization. And that's a hard one, right? To have that value in there of how do we have that balance. I think another aspect in that is, again, that decision making. So in an organization, in a healthy organization, we want people to be able to be free to voice their opinions, to give suggestions. And in fact, we look for that. So in a lot of lot of organizations that are very high functioning, they actively seek out, what do you think? You're an expert in this area. I might just be the CEO. What do you think about that? So what can you tell me about that? So being able to leverage all of those individual expertise to make for the overall good of the organization is integral. And then I think the other one is sort of an amorphous kind of that culture we talked about, and interpersonal relationships. So having an environment where people want to come to work, they enjoy being at work, they are treated well, being respectfully treated, and if you have friends at work, that's the bonus. I do tell organizations and people in there, you don't have to love your coworkers. You don't have to be best friends with them, because not everybody is going to have the same values or interests. But if you can see their values, we talk a lot about perspective taking. So, and helping people develop good interpersonal relationships at work. Being able to understand that somebody may be different from me, but they bring something to the job that's equally valuable. And then I can hopefully have a friendship from that. And if not, just a very collegial relationship and respect the other individual. So you've probably heard me say it about, 20, 30 times by now, but I think respect is probably that key aspect in that centers around all of these things. So if you respect each other, and it's not only from top down, it has to be bottom up. If you respect your colleagues, your boss, your staff, direct reports, and that, then you want them to be healthy. You want them to have that balance, to develop, have input, and to be healthy and safe. So I think that's part of that value and respect aspect that goes so far.
It's interesting you bring up the topic of friends in a workplace setting. In some of my own research, I was actually really surprised at the importance of those social relationships. So, a lot of my research was in a healthcare setting related to change management. And the question that I had asked was about, how do you support change? What are the sort of antecedent conditions? And they really said, if this affects my friends negatively, I'm not supporting change. And in a healthcare setting, I found that really surprising. But just, one of the key points, one of the really important factors in supporting that organizational change was those social relationships and the impact. So just, it was, for me, it was a real eye-opener, doing that research and understanding the impact of that.
And it's that collegial support as well, that friendship and collegial support. We've done research that looks at, how satisfied people are with organizations, and they hate the organization, they love their group. That's the only thing that's keeping them to the organization, is sort of a very tight-knit group. So if, giving feedback to organizations, we can kind of say, well, yay, you have these tight groups, but kind of boo, because you have to go that next step and try, how do you integrate that group back in with the organization? Because then they will be, even a higher commitment to the organization and want to work together more. So yeah, never underestimate the value of friendship and interpersonal good collegial relationships.
Yeah. So if these are the foundational pieces of a healthy workplace, what are some of the sort of key performance indicators? What are some of the things that leaders should be looking out for that tells them that, hey, maybe your workplace isn't what you thought? Because I've had this discussion with a number of people, and they've said, hey, listen, our workplace is fantastic. Everybody's really happy here. But you step into that situation and you interview the staff, and they're like, oh, yeah, no, it's not. So what should people actually be looking for?
Okay. So some of the, I guess, there's the obvious indicators, right? If you're running an organization, you have really high turnover, you have high absenteeism, sick leave, high levels, you're hearing burnout, job stress, high levels of conflict or interpersonal conflict, that low level of trust. Nobody seems to be, they don't trust their employees, right? Employees don't trust that. Then I think those are some obvious ones that we know. But there's maybe some others that are slightly more subtle. And this is where I think it's important for organizations to kind of pay attention to. And interestingly, I think some of these came out when we moved to a remote environment too, because so for example, if you had concerns, if you moved to a remote working environment after COVID, and you were really concerned that your workers were going to goof off or they weren't going to do their job and doing all that, you didn't have a healthy workplace to begin with. Okay, you did not have that. If you were concerned that your workers were taking advantage of the situation, you don't have a healthy workplace. I say this to CEOs and leaders and stuff. If you don't feel comfortable in taking holidays, if you can't leave your organization, either because you worry that the work isn't going to get done or get done properly, or if you have a culture that it's not good to take breaks and leave, then I would say, we need to sit down and chat about your culture and how to make it a healthier workplace. I think if you're, as a leader, if you're spending more time on issues of performance management, and less on just supporting your staff and asking your staff, what do you guys need? What can I do for you? How are we planning for the future? That is definitely an unhealthy workplace, right? So we're spending all our time kind of correcting behavior and working at that. And I think it comes down to probably, again, I'm kind of repeating what I said, but if you're more worried about increasing the wealth of yourself or your stakeholders than the current health and safety of your workers, then that's definitely sort of the antithesis of a healthy workplace. Even though, as I noted before, that we need both. You need to have that. You need to have an effective, functioning organization that is succeeding. Because if the business goes under, it doesn't really matter how happy or healthy your workers are, right? So it has to be a viable, sustainable business. But if you start making decisions that are going to jeopardize the well-being of your workforce because you want more growth, more money, and those things, then we'd have to have a sit down and chat about what your priorities really are.
So when you're sitting down with these leaders and these CEOs, et cetera, are there any obvious strategies? The CEO doesn't take a vacation. There's high turnover rates in the organization. What are the initial strategies that you talk to them about at fixing that?
It depends on the organization, obviously. It depends on what some of the issues are and where it's coming from. But in a case where it's where the CEO owns the company, like a smaller one, it can be a little bit easier because in some ways the CEO/owner gets to decide, right? Your business. Do you want this to be a healthy one or not? You can sit down and decide. And if you want to work your workers to the ground, basically the ground and use them, that's fine. I'm not a part of it, but you get to decide that. But if you really buy into the arguments that having a healthier workforce is not only the moral, ethical, right thing to do, but it's also a good business case, then we have a platform that we can start discussing. So what we typically do is we go through and we look at some of the indicators, like what are they looking at, and of course then we go and we talk to the workers, we talk to leaders, and we find out what are their perspectives. Because nobody, if you ever have a consultant coming into your organization and going, boom, I know what your problem is and I'm going to come in and fix it, the first thing I would do is fire them. Politely say thank you very much, but it's not a good match. You want to know what your workforce is, right? They have to have a good understanding of your issues, of your workers, and I talk about a builds model that I developed I don't know, 15 years ago. And it really stands for, getting buy-in. So if we're going to change some things and make things, I have to have buy-in from the CEO, from the frontline workers, from everybody, and say, this is where we want to go. I have to then also have the U is the understanding. And understand where are we, what's the status quo? Where are we at? Talking to workers, talking to everyone. Then we have to look at some type of intervention in terms of what types of initiatives. You can have interventions or initiatives as the I. What things are we doing with the organization? What can we do? And it's usually a jointly developed protocol of moving forward. Then we have the L and the D. So the L in build is the learn. So a lot of times we go in and we just do all of these things to organizations and we're like, there, yay, we're awesome, and walk away. Not me, but some people do. But we need that learn. We need to understand, is this working, right? So we have to have constant, you talked before about, we do a lot on assessment and monitoring. Is this working? What needs to be changed? And that leads into the D and the S of it, which is develop sustainability, right? If this is somewhere you want to go, how is it going to be maintained? It can't just be, again, that oranges in the cafeteria. It has to be at every level of the organization. Ideally, as part of your mission statement, as part of your vision, and something that is enacted on a day-to-day basis. So it becomes part of your values. You don't think, wow, what am I doing to create a healthy workplace? It's just, this is what I do at work. I like a Richard Branson quote when he was asked about, customers first. And had said that, customers aren't their first priority. Their employees are their first priority. Because if you treat employees right, then they are going to go ahead and treat the customers fairly and with respect. So his emphasis on the business sense is enacted in everything that he does, and his belief that the employees are their number one concern.
Let's talk a little bit about technology. You and I, before we started recording this podcast, we were kind of lamenting technology and the steep learning curve that everybody has gone through. And I'm, with respect to some teaching that you're doing and I'm doing, I'm stealing some of your ideas. But we know that technology isn't by itself necessarily good or bad, but we're embracing or we're moving to hybrid or remote work environments. And I think that there's some issues that leaders need to be aware of. There's some differences. So are there any best practices with respect to working remotely or in a hybrid environment that you think people need to address, leaders need to address in their workplace?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the question is, I guess, and technology fits in there, and so I'll use that as part of it. But we actually do know a lot about remote work. We've been studying. We used to call it telework, and we've been studying it for decades. And we know that there were benefits to it. It provided a lot of flexibility to the worker. It reduced commuting time. It helped with communication, like people were if geographically distant, freeing up office space. There was a lot of good things about it. But there was also a lot of concerns that were recognized about productivity, a lot about feeling isolated, not part of that group. So when, in 2020, when we were hit with shutdowns and organizations had to turn to remote working, they had all of those challenges and some of the benefits and challenges, but they also had a whole wealth of new ones because it shifted to remote work en masse, regardless of whether the individuals wanted to or not. In the past, it was typically ones who wanted to work remotely. It was a privilege. They had to work remotely, whether they had the equipment and resources to do it, and that's your technology. They may have had to learn how to use new programming, new software, new cameras, all of these things, which they may never had any access to, and they probably got zero or little training on it, because it was like, it was like, boom, they're in that. They also didn't necessarily have the process or the procedures and how to do their work at home. Many organizations were still dealing in paper, right? And all of a sudden they're like, well, how do I get forms filled out? How do I, we don't even have online forms, like, or even the space to do the work at home, right? So they're working maybe on the corner of their couch, with a couple of kids and or dogs, cats around them. And so there was all of these challenges. So yes, technology, to answer part of your question, technology is not good or bad, and it definitely has the capacity to help. We talk about in a couple of our papers about the eye paradox, which is, we've heard a lot about the techno stress and the stressors of technology, but it comes down to how technology is used. So if you're using it to, again, empower the worker, that they're using it as a way to do, as an effective way to do their job. If you are giving them, the one thing that came out in a couple of studies, if you're giving them the support, if they have the technical support and aids and training to do that, all of those go a long way. If you don't have the right equipment, there's breakdowns, there's a whole bunch of techno stressors around that can really complicate one's life and one's job, as we know. And I like to say, everybody loves technology when it's working.
When it's
And
working.
you just find that we have a lot of times when it's just not. So that can really, really stress them out. To answer your second part of your question, I guess, which is, so what is it that can we do with technology and around that? I think there's again, thinking about how do we leverage technology to do all the things, to help us do the things that we need to and want to do. So we have to address the resources issue. You can't expect people to work at home and not have training in technology, not to have the technological supports to do that. We also have to really think about individual preferences for remote work. So some of your employees are going to have a bigger challenge with it. And it may be the extroverted ones that really find that their energy by being with other individuals each day, and they get into their job because there's that energy of people around them. And it may just be the extent to which people want separate work-life boundaries. So there's a boundary preference we talk about, which really influences whether people can work effectively at home. Some people have trouble with it because they can't physically or mentally shut that out. The other big thing, I guess I got maybe two other points with this, is it's communication. I think it's a big thing that we're seeing is that we have to develop different communication and check-in practices. And it's not necessarily better, it's just different. That's something that works in remote context. So we don't have this luxury of face-to-face interactions anymore, right? We don't get to, see if people like the idea, like reading their facial expressions and body language. Even, in a tiny little picture like this, you can't always tell. Did they just roll their eyes at my suggestion, or do they think it's brilliant? I don't know. We don't have that luxury of, popping in, to our boss's office and saying, is this what you meant when you asked me, to do this? We don't also have the luxury of seeing colleagues in the hallway or having those brainstorming sessions around the water cooler, right? That can really, they're informal, but they help us and energize us. And it's not always about us. It can help them. You start realizing, wait, George just didn't seem himself this morning. And you can touch base with him and say, hey, how's it going? And it might be a small thing. And he's like, oh, I'm struggling with this program. And it may be something that you can go, oh, yeah, did that yesterday. Here, I can help you. Or it may be personal issues that he's struggling with that you just don't know. So all of those things that and I call it a luxury now, right? That we took for granted, is that, I think of, my own workplace in years ago, my colleague across the hall, if we had questions, we could just kind of shout out to each other. And just kind of say, what did you do for this? Okay, got it. Or, they want a meeting tomorrow at 9. Are you good? Yep, it's all done. Now it takes much more thoughtful work, right? I have to remember, I have to contact and do that. So a lot of leaders, it's not only leaders. I think we're put this on the shoulders of leaders, but it really is about all of us. It's about us checking in with our colleagues and our leaders and saying, hey, you guys are doing a great job. Thank you for helping me out. And the leaders checking in on everybody. And it's sometimes, if you've had a very collegial, sort of informal type of communication, you're going to struggle because it's going to seem artificial. Because you're going to say, I'm going to have like a 10-minute check-in with you every Monday at 9. And that just doesn't seem as fluid as it used to be. But we need more of that. And a lot of times, they just to make sure that people feel free, that you can check in, that you have those opportunities for brainstorming sessions.
It was interesting here. We were moving to a hybrid model, and so we had to kind of set the policies in place. And so when the pandemic rolled around, we literally said, well, take your laptop home and don't come back for a few weeks, and we'll figure out what happens down the road. So I think we were very fortunate in that way. But exactly as you talked about, I think my strategy is that kind of management by walking around. It was having conversations, informal conversations with people, and that disappeared. And then we turned it into those very formalized check-ins, which was, hey, listen, I'm going to book a half an hour with you on Mondays, and it became very structured. And I never liked this idea of having a meeting for meeting's sake, but then realizing that you really needed that social context. And from my perspective, saying to all of our staff, if you just want to have a half an hour meeting on a social basis, that's fantastic. Go ahead, and encouraging that. And I think it was odd to begin with, but it was something that we had to do here to keep the team together.
And that's it, and I have many meetings where, even if they're short half-hour meetings, 25 minutes of them are about what did you do on the weekend, right? Or what's happening in your life. And then the other 5 is great. How are we doing? What is our goal setting? What do you need from me? How can I help? And then we can move on. And we seem to seek out and really need or some more than others, right? That kind of that social connection and that natural, I guess, as you say, the informal conversations of that. So it comes back to again, how can we leverage technology? So we've tried different things. I know some of my former students and who are PhD students who are now out there, being leaders in organizations, they were saying they were having their Friday get-togethers. It might be Friday cocktail hour, just because they needed that, and it's a social part of it, but it also does many things. It makes people feel more comfortable if they have to ask a work question. It sometimes highlights that you're not the only person going through that problem. I've talked to a lot of my colleagues and my students and organization workers and leaders about how people are feeling. I don't know if we can coin a new term. I don't know, the COVID fuzzy brain, and they're just we don't know. We don't feel motivated. What's the meaning? Why are we doing this? And so I go out and I ask some of I'm like, how are you guys doing? Are you feeling like this? And I can't believe the number of oh my God, I thought it was just me. And I'm like, no, you're not alone. So that knowledge in and of itself helped them go, okay, it's not just me. I'm not going crazy. And it almost gave them the strength to go, okay, now let's set our next goal and move forward. So there is something about this, that we're social animals, right? And so bringing them together, I've been thinking with my own workplace and stuff, do we need more of those social interactions? And even if it's some game night or game weekend and some competition, because we all love competition, just to get people interacting and feeling like they're part of a team.
It's interesting what you can uncover with these social meetings. From a professional perspective, one of the things we did was we did an icebreaker, and we got you to take a picture, our staff, take a picture of your workspace. And we were trying to match a person's workspace with the individual. It's kind of a competition. And you know what that...
I'm looking at mine.
You're going to score very well on the background score when it's scored. But one of the things...
People would guess it. I think I've got horses and dogs back there.
Yes,
so.
yes. One of the things that I uncovered was that some people had fantastic desks set up, ergonomics were considered, proper chairs, and then there were others that were sitting at their kitchen table, sharing a space with their partner, working in the same location. And so from an employer's perspective, what I do now is when we bring a staff member on, I say, like, what do you need to create a work environment for yourself? Like, do you need a chair? Like, do we have to look at getting you a proper desk? So some of those social interactions, it's amazing what you can actually glean from those as a leader and address some of those problems. So.
And that's great. You took sort of a social activity and you used it as a way to improve their work situation and in your leadership capacity to kind of say, hey, this is something that I can help people with. So, kudos to you for doing that. And I know it always sounds like an oxymoron to me, but we have to be more remotely accessible. So, and it's a strange concept to us, right? We don't necessarily know how to do that. What is the best way? What is too much? We also have people think, oh, I'm zoomed out for meetings, right? I just can't do another one. So it's, how do you find that balance? And we can't say there's no magical number or design for it. You just have to have a good sense what works for each individual, each of your staff, what works for you, what works for your organization. I've actually found, and I know in working that, is sometimes it's been more valuable. So it's really helped some of us sort of stay more involved and in touch because we know we're meeting. It's like being held, on some of these projects. Whereas in the past, we might not have met for weeks or months, but because we don't see each other, we're like, okay, I think we need to really touch base. And that I think has been actually made us more productive on some of these things. So again, it's just finding the pattern and the sort of the work process that works for yourself and for the group.
I'm going to shift gears on you a little bit here now, and I'm going to ask you about your EyeLead project. What is it? What's the background and sort of current state of that project? Always interested to hear about this, but I think our listeners would too.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're really quite excited about this. It's a collaborative project that I'm doing with Dr. Catherine Laughlin and Dr. Kara Arnold, and it's funded through the Women and Gender Equality Canada. And the goals of it were to better understand how do we support women and other disadvantaged groups at work, and specifically in leadership positions, as well as how do we help leaders and all genders of leaders support their staff and create inclusive workplaces, so that it's more than just like increasing target numbers. So we're not less interested, but that wasn't the main focus of it. But it's more about how do we value and maximize the members' strengths and potential in the workplace. So I guess the basic idea underlying all of this is that if we take responsibility for, I'm coming back to my buzzword of respect, if we treat each other with respect, which is not only a key part of a psychologically healthy workplace, but also an inclusive workplace, and if we value differences, I think that's maybe a little bit more challenging because it's human nature to like similarities. So we like people like ourselves. We like people who have the same values as ourselves, who do the same things. That's just human nature. But if we can encourage that sort of exploration and that valuing the differences and finding out how your differences, and you do things that I don't like, but you're actually better at some things, can benefit me in the job, and what I do and my strengths can benefit you. All of those things taken together can foster this inclusive workplace. So where we're at now, our current state, I guess, is we've developed and started the validation of a coaching program and a survey for that. We've done focus groups and interviews. And the design of this coaching is to support leaders. And it's interesting that we're not just focusing on leaders, but also their teams, because we're taking this mutual accountability for this, and implementing it sort of with a variety of organizations, hopefully across Canada over the next few months, to saying, can this increase behaviors that will support inclusion, support differences, and again kind of make it a healthier workplace.
I don't know if you're there yet in your research, but can you draw any inferences at this point on how a much more inclusive workplace affects workplace health?
In terms of our research directly, we don't have I shouldn't say that. We do have some data, some preliminary data from this that we're just in the process of analyzing, that looking at, so the extent to which I view my workplace as inclusive, so as supportive and those things, the better some better health indicators for me, as well as leaders. So leaders, if they're viewing it, they're in the same boat. So if we extrapolate from some of the healthy workplace literature, this isn't a shock, right? If you think that your organization is supporting others better, then you tend to have sort of better health outcomes, lower burnout, higher satisfaction and commitment to the organization, and just better life satisfaction overall. So we're hoping, again, we're just in the middle of this, so we're hoping we're going to be able to replicate some of this with that inclusion. Because the interesting thing with the inclusive workplace, so it's not a preferential workplace, right? So if I'm looking at how do I support certain groups, but it means that I'm wanting all groups to be equally supported, right? So it's in a very equitable way, so that people have the advantages that they need, everybody has what they need to do their job. So it's never about exclusion. It's all about how we are supporting each other.
So coming from a healthcare background, your third goal at this project about self-care, it kind of jumped off the page at me. Can you talk a little bit about what, in this context, self-care, or maybe the definition of what self-care is from your perspective?
Absolutely. And this is kind of interesting, because this was the sort of that third main goal of the project, of the program. And I would say, I don't want to say, we got a little bit of a sort of kickback from some people, and even as we were developing it, some of our participants, they're like, we don't understand. What has this got to do with leadership? What do we have with inclusion? And so I stood firm on this, and I'm like, and we all did. We were like, no, darn it all, this is integral, because some of the other work we know is anytime we do work with leaders, they take the brunt of it, right? So we've had some stuff where we're supporting and developing leaders, but they're feeling a little bit more stressed out, because it's almost like the weight of the organization and all of these things are on their shoulder. So I said, I'm not doing anything else with leaders until we have this support and self-care part of it. And I think we've all been vindicated on this, because now we're having organizations coming to us and going, yes, inclusive leadership is important, but how are we going to talk about leadership self-care, because we're having leaders burning out and they are struggling. And so we feel slightly vindicated in that. But to go back to your original question, what do we mean by self-care? And I think that is just ensuring that you have the energy, the resources, and the health that you need to be effective in your work and also in your life in general. So, and we can view it in terms of the physical resources. So, you have good physical health habits, you're eating well, you're getting good quality sleep, exercising regularly. But it's also about this psychological health, and a lot about is developing the skills and resources that you can handle the work and life demands that are thrown at you. So, whether they're planned things, like sometimes it's just work, right? That can be just the demand. Sometimes it's the unexpected things that we talked about, that those computer breakdowns or the car breakdown, the relationship breakdown. How do we have the ability? Do we have the supports? Do we have a good support system? Do we have the skills and abilities that we can that face those challenges and get through them?
I'm glad you held your ground. And I think that you predicted the future a little bit here on we, especially during COVID, we've seen the impact of trying to lead organizations and the stress that has on not just leaders, but the entire organization. But the idea that self-care is very important, that was foresight, I think. So I'm going to ask you now, what do you see coming in the future with respect to psychologically healthy workplaces? What's the next time you have to hold your ground and say, yes, this needs to be included in the research? What is that topic? What's your prediction?
Oh, good. These are good questions, Cam. So I think, and this is one that I've maybe been holding my ground on a little bit, and there is still a little resistance, is when we go into organizations or dealing with any of this, we really take a very holistic approach to this. So even if somebody says, we have issues with, individuals just aren't coping well, or they're stressed out, or we have a leadership problem, I always go in and I say, okay, I want to hear more, and I want to talk about this. So one of my friends and researchers, Karina Nielsen out of the UK, she has in all of her writings talking about the IGLOO model, so the IGLOO, which is talking about the individual, the group, the leadership, and overall organization. So when we go in, we talk about how do we support individuals, how do we develop and support groups, and how do we develop and support the leaders, as well as the overall organization. And until we go in and really look at it that way, I think you're always just doing sort of a Band-Aid job. Like if you're just addressing one and ignoring everything else, you're not really understanding that overall culture of a healthy workplace. And I think that's the biggest sort of over the past, even the past 10 years on that, is really getting organizations to think about that bigger picture and where they're moving on. I think maybe another one is when we're talking about, I hear a lot of organizations saying, when we get back to normal, when we get back to more normal, when we get back to the way it was. And I'm really encouraging them to look at this as an opportunity, and maybe an unwanted one, maybe, and obviously devastating in so many ways, but it's happened. We're in this position, and again, I really talk about leveraging. So how can we leverage what we've learned over the past, 18 months, 2 years, to move forward with developing healthy workplaces, inclusive workplaces? How do we use what we know about the workplace to leverage all the positive things and to be able to support our workers?
So if you have,
and I'm just thinking, and I could go on for another hour, but I'll add just sort of a little caveat, or not a caveat, but a little aspect to that is. And that's an aspect, when we're doing with EyeLead and what we've done with some of our other programs and crew and leadership, is the team's part of it. Everything cannot come down on the leader's shoulders. Yes, they are there. They can be the change managers. They can be the ones that are motivating and all of that. But it really is a universal effort. So I talk a lot about taking accountability, everybody in the group and the teams, about what they need, what they're doing for their leader, what the leader's doing for them, and really, again, look at it maybe more as a family, where everybody has their roles, responsibilities, but they have to work together. And it's not just somebody coming in like the leader and saying, I'm going to create a healthy workplace for you. We all have to take responsibility for it.
So beyond this more, I'm going to use the term holistic approach, it's leaders, followers, and everybody in between. What are some of the key takeaways that you hope people will take from our discussion today?
Oh goodness! Again, how much time do we have on this one? Okay, I'll try and keep this to a minimum. Okay. Okay, I think first that we have to think about, if we're going to start on a very positive note, healthy workers, healthy workplaces are definitely possible, but they just don't happen spontaneously. So we really have to take this active approach. We as leaders, and also frontline, like anybody, have to prioritize the health and functioning. And so that's why I say by I mean everybody in the organization. As part of that, when I'm dealing with, I've got various models of leadership, right, in terms of how they impact employee health and well-being. And I've just come up with another acronym that I think it helps organizations think about it, is when you're trying to lead in this way, but again, it can apply to informal leadership of everybody. I think of, we think of mums, right? Because my mom was certainly like this. So we think of modeling, role modeling. In order to be a healthy leader, healthy workplace, we have to have good role modeling. The U is understanding. And I talked about that as perspective taking, but also understanding what everybody's going with. So we have to know what's happening, but we also have to, we see a lot of the memes right now, be kind. We don't know what people are going through. So we just have that understanding that we just try to be kind. The other M is the mentoring. And that ally and sponsorship aspect. So how are we support? And then the last part is supporting. So if you think, I love my acronyms. So if I'm thinking, if I wanted to be a good leader in there, I want to be it's kind of these mum behaviors. So modeling, understanding, mentoring, and supporting. So that was very long. That was only one point.
It was a great point though.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think my second point is that psychologically healthy, we started with that. It's not an outcome, it's a culture. So if you start thinking about it as a value and a way of working and leading and interacting, in which you value worker well-being, and that has as sort of an equal importance to functioning, then you're well on your way to being, that in and of itself is probably more than half the battle. If you buy into that, you're well on your way to being a healthy workplace. In terms of, I guess we should talk about remote work. So we've talked about that. It is a challenge. We're not going to lie about that. It can be but it can also be very positive. Some people love it, some hate it. So again, it's our job to figure out how do we sort of leverage all those positive aspects of it. What is it that people like, and how do we go then mitigate some of the challenges? And with a realization that it may not be for everyone or for every job, right? As you had said, you guys shifted fairly seamlessly into that. You picked up your computers and you went home and you were able to make it work. A lot of organizations, it's not that simple. It really is a struggle. So we have to figure out, really take it as an individual consult in terms of what works, what doesn't. And then for you, in terms of, I'll give you some of the health of your healthcare. We'll talk about self-care. How's that? So I've touched on sort of the four major things. I think, again, it really is essential for not only for staff, but also for leaders. So we can't ignore leaders in all of this. Like in the past, we've always talked about, telling the leaders, like, make sure your staff are doing well. You got to do all of these things to improve their well-being. And then we just kind of throw the leaders to the curb. So we really need to say that they're both equally important, and obviously for their own well-being, but it comes that full circle by that effective functioning. So I would really argue as to end that really does need to be a priority in the workplace. Full stop.
the work that we do here in the organization. We talk about our vision, which is safe, healthy, inclusive workplaces for all, and I think that has resonated, I think, with some of the discussion that we've had today about being inclusive. But it takes effort across the board. This is not something that happens, as we've talked about, by just putting the foos table in the office, right? That's an outcome.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not dissing a foos table.
No,
if my workplace wanted to put that in, I'd be all over it. But yeah.
No, I know I'm not criticizing those organizations that do that, no, but I think that I think it's very important, the perspective that you and I have talked about, which is the foosball table does not by itself create the culture that you're looking for. You have to, it's hard work. And if a foosball table helps you create, if it's a tool to help you create that culture at the end of the day, then that's fantastic. But that's not the work itself that you have to create. It's understanding your individual employees, encouraging them, building them, and actually really understanding who they are and helping them grow as individuals. And I think I've taken that from a lot of our discussion today. So a lot of learning for me as well. Thank you very much. This was a fantastic interview. I learned a lot myself, and I think just absolutely as an organization, I'll thank you again for working with us, not only in the research, but webinars and now podcasts, etc. And we look forward to continuing this working relationship. So again, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As I said, I love talking about my work. So this is, and it's very energizing, right? So that's the social aspect of it too. And talking about this, it's been wonderful. And thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and look forward to other projects.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Continue your learning and connect with us at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.